everyone. Wow, this is the fullest our computer screen has been. There's quite a few of you zooming in. Really quickly, so I'm going to give a kind of overview of what we're doing today. As I said in my email, we're going to have a short class for a couple reasons. First one is I've gotten a couple emails of people being a little bit overwhelmed or sick or all that. And I think this is a kind of a good point in the semester to kind of stop and take stock of where we are. So I developed, instead of overwhelming you and kind of having you in class for multiple hours, I'm hoping that you'll use some of the class time today to start thinking about your final project, to actually carve out some of that space for your final project. And you might be thinking, why the heck are we talking about a final? It's week 5. But I want us to kind of think about it early, because for your final project, you're going to have to read a little, research a little, and if we don't start that now, it can be really overwhelming. So you are free to go once the class will probably end around 8:30, 8:45. You're free to, you know, log off or whatever, but hopefully you'll use at least, you know, a little bit of time that you would be normally in class to do the activity. I don't care when you do it, as long as for Wednesday next week you have it completed, and I'll explain what that is in a few minutes. We're going to kind of finish up last week's discussion with Elaine Richardson today, and we're going to talk about a couple of the pieces from this week. We don't have all the presentations in, so I'm going to leave some of them to discuss for next week, and we'll kind of use next week as a wrapping up of the first 6 weeks. We'll talk about, I think it's Ralph Cintrone's book, which is a really fantastic book. I don't know if any of you have started it yet. We're going to read a couple chapters from that, but really it's one of those books that if you have time to read the whole thing, it's a fantastic study. It's called Angel's Town. Really quickly, can I get a show of hands of people on the screen if you're actually presenting an article today? Do any of you want to say anything? Okay, we got one. Yeah, do you want to say something about it?
Sorry, it took me a minute to unmute. I can, the presentation's there, and it's a voiceover, so they can go back and look at it at any point. I didn't realize when I chose the article it was such a lengthy article. So I noticed after recording, it went over like by a minute. So it's like 8 minutes. At the very end of it, I did put a meme, and it's Pauly Shore. And if those of us who are old enough to remember Pauly Shore from the 80s, does the way he talks really made me think about the different Englishes that we talked about, the Englishes that the article talked about, and I didn't address that in the video because it was so long. But so okay. I can show it or talk about it, or they can go back and watch it.
Yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. No, well, we can watch it in class actually, and then you can kind of follow up. Does anyone else want to present either their article, or do you want to say anything about your article? No one has to. I just want to give you the chance because I know people Skype in at different days. All right, so what we're going to do, I want you to take a couple minutes. We're going to do a little free writing right now to get you ready for what the activity is going to be later. So we're going to take about 5-6 minutes. And what I want you to do is this is just for you. I'm not collecting it. I'm not looking at it. So it can be chicken scratch. It can be drawings, whatever you want. But I want you to start thinking about which texts in this class have kind of been interesting for you. Whether it's interesting because you like them, interesting because you want to challenge them, like which ones stand out to you and why. Start noting that. And then which ones are you actually interested in? Like, do you want to take up the conversation? You know, so start thinking about one of my big things that I do when I'm thinking about research is I like keywords. So what are the keywords you might be interested in based on the articles? So for instance, if you're interested in Jay Dolmage's work, you might be thinking about disability studies or ableism or disability rhetoric or immigration policies, for instance, as your keywords. So note some keywords, note some people or articles you find interesting. And then if there's, you don't have to go back and look at them, but if you remember any quotes or topics that they're talking about that you can just jot down as, you know, a key phrase or a word or two that stands out to you about the article, go ahead and do that. So we'll take about 5-6 minutes to do this, and then I'll come back and explain what we're doing next. So I'm gonna have my computer open and take some notes, but I want a couple people to share what they're talking about. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some notes, so that way in the next, you know, week or two, as you're developing this pre-proposal, we'll call it, it's a very much a brainstorming activity, but as you're developing this, I want to be thinking about how to help you all, and if I have articles, and I'm going to actually post this somewhere, so that way, you know, if in your research someone comes across, you know, a popular article about immigration and composition right now, we can kind of share those resources, so, you know, everyone's kind of looking out for each other's topics. So if someone doesn't mind sharing just kind of what are you thinking about? Again, this is very much brainstorming. No you're not, you don't have to be attached to these ideas for your project, but what kind of things are you brainstorming that you're interested in? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I actually have a pretty specific pitch I'd like to run by you.
Sure.
Because for Dr. Carter's class, I'm taking I'm doing war rhetoric in a song, you know, in a band that did a lot of protest music, but then when 9/11 hit, it got very specific. It stopped being general. And I said to her, oh, I used my good idea for that. And she said, maybe look at a different way, like a different chapter in a similar dissertation.
Yeah.
Because there's this song, I'm mad at the state of popular music, but I found this song called Camp America.
Okay.
And the song in the video is very, I'll just read it. I'm interested in the current rhetorical construction of citizenship, and while it's something that occurred in the readings as far back as the founding, with English-only appointees and majority non-English-speaking colonies, the current climate of dehumanization is what I wanted to explore, specifically being interested in this song and the video as pop culture pushback to that. And then just looking up the song to remember I got the title right. Apparently, it's also the name of a legit program that brings people in. So I don't know if that was.
And what's that called?
Camp America.
Camp America. Okay. Yeah. So you're wondering if you can kind of do a paper on, or a symposium topic on like war rhetoric.
Well, that's the one I'm doing already. So for this, it would be citizenship.
That absolutely seems possible. I mean, we've already a little bit talked about Jay Dulmich. Vincent Portillo's work.
Well, that, yeah,
Amy Wan is a good resource. I don't think we read Amy Wan. She wrote a book called Producing Good Citizens.
We read that this semester. Yeah, I have.
Kate Vieira wrote American by Paper. Yeah. So yeah, you got ideas already. You're good to go. So what? Give me some key words that you're thinking about. Obviously, citizenship, right?
Yeah, this concept of legal versus illegal, like a person, which we tried to talk about in 1301 to an extent, with Liliana, and even to an extent with Garcia, who would be another one to look at for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the clever thing about the video, why the video is cool, they take the images and they take detention center, real things that are reported to have happened, and they do it to white kids. And at the end, it asks, like, the point, and I found an interview with the guy behind the video, and it said, like, this doesn't happen, it wouldn't happen to white kids, and that's the point of the video.
Yeah. Okay.
So.
Yeah, you definitely have some ideas here. All right, can someone else share their idea? Yeah, Jacqueline.
I was just thinking about it, but I wanted to explore more about English as a currency and the economics of English, and about the limitations of social mobility for non-native speakers of English.
Yeah, absolutely. What so keywords, we kind of have economics of English, right?
Native ability, world Englishes, capitalism, lingua
Yeah.
franca.
Yeah, that absolutely sounds like a great resource. The first thing that came to my mind was obviously, this week's reading with Buying into English and Min Zan Lu's work, Living English Work. But there's a new book. It just came out maybe a year or so ago. It's actually called, I think it's called Economies of Composition, I think. You'll recognize some of the names in it. Okay, so there's Economies of Writing by Bruce Warner, right? We read his work the first week. Tony Scott, Bawarshi, this would probably be a good one. But yeah, so there's new books kind of thinking about economies of writing, and then there's another book. Let me think of what it is. I can picture that it's got like 3 colors. It's red, yellow, and blue. Actually might be Bruce Warner's new book. But you definitely have new scholarship out there. So if even with the keywords that you've already given us, if you kind of start Google searching, those names, I think a lot of information will come up with that. And I have, in the activity we're doing later, I have more specific modes of research that you can go through. So you'll definitely have things to start with. Someone else want to share theirs? Maybe one more person? Yeah, Andrew.
So something that came to mind, and this happened in the first week after you had put up your discussion board regarding tools for composition, and there was something that really stuck out to me, which had to do with time, and time being a tool for composition. And you made a comment on my posting regarding time, exigence, and context, talking about Black Lives Matter and Me Too movements and things like that, and historical importance. And so this idea of time and maybe working with something like that, I didn't quite know how I'd go about it, but I like that idea of time being a major factor in how composition and rhetoric and things like that come into play in our world.
Yeah. So the first thing that I was thinking about, right, and so that yours is a little bit more abstract. You're putting me on the spot with it. But the first thing that I was thinking about is actually Lori Grease's work. And I believe it was for a journal called Enculturation. Lori Grease, she kind of studies, she does what's called, I think, circulation studies and new material and stuff. And she actually studies how images or symbols change over time and why they're important at different moments as opposed to, other moments. So for instance, her main book, which I can't think of what the name is, but it's about the Obama Hope poster and how it went into like Homer Simpson's dough and Obama nope, and like how that image circulated and recirculated and how it was impacted by that moment of time and the exigence, the kind of what was happening in the current moment. Let me look really quick. So her book is called Still Life. Yeah, okay. Still Life with Rhetoric.
Got it. I was going to say, I was looking over here on my end, and that's what came up.
Still Life with Rhetoric, yeah. So a new materialist approach for visual rhetorics, and so this idea of how an image circulates across time and space, and what's happening in the moment that allows it to change, right? And then her other article that I was thinking about, I'll look it up. I don't want to type in the words for it because it's about kind of swastikas and the Nazi symbols, and she's tracking that. I'll look at that when we're on our next topic. But that's kind of the first thing I was thinking about. Is that anywhere close to what you're imagining?
Yeah, that's actually really, really tightly knit with what I'm thinking about. So thank you for that.
Okay. So what kind of keywords are you thinking with that, right? Because you can't just type in time to a Google search or an article search. So what kind of keywords would that
So
would help you
that's
with
kind
that?
of where I'm a little bit at a loss, but some things that kind of came to mind were like local practice or this, like you had just brought up, this historical context of imagery or in particular moments in time. And then you mentioned, the swastika and how it's used at one point in time as the Nazi symbol, and then at a previous moment in time it was like a Buddhist symbol. And so maybe looking a little bit further into something like that. I don't quite know how I'd be able to find keywords for something along those lines, but maybe
Yeah.
enough.
So just as you're talking, it makes me think of like circulation is a big kind of concept in composition. Does anyone else have ideas for keywords Andrew could use?
Almost appropriation. If it was a Buddhist symbol and it was taken to be something extraordinarily violent, like that's...
Yeah, maybe appropriation, right? And these are just to get you thinking. It doesn't
Right.
mean that you're gonna, settle on that, but we need some keywords to start.
I also thought of I know the change of time and how it impacts words and how we view things is the way we spoke and the way that we printed things changed after the events of 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So I know there's one article pertaining to a children's book that I recently read, but I'm not sure if there's any read things that revolve around how that time.
Yeah. Like how things change in like the political context after something happens.
Because that's like not necessarily appropriation, but
So much of what you could do and say became almost a taboo. It shifted
a shift.
so much of what was
Mhm.
what you were just allowed to say and do, or what it became a very us versus them kind of time.
Yeah.
There are more specific probably words for this type of attitude, but I don't know.
Right. I can't think of it right now, but even that us versus them idea of so it's definitely to be thinking about. Andrew, this was the one. It's actually, I can send you this link, but it's from the Watson Conference. So the Watson Conference is a really cool conference. The University of Louisville, every like 2 or 3 years, gets an endowment of, I don't know, probably like $1 million or something to put on a conference. And they have about 10 keynote speakers, and they all do kind of short essays. And this was Lori Grease's essay this year. And so it's swastika monitoring, developing digital research tools to track visual rhetorics of hate. And so she talks about her methodology and then how she's tracking like the use of the swastika across space and time.
Wow.
So you might want to just look at kind of what keywords she uses.
Yeah.
Maybe it's materialist rhetoric, maybe it's circulation.
It also reminds me of that digital humanities project we did. It's mapping Islamophobia.
Yeah.
I don't know if that has any keywords on it, but you can play with that and see over time instances of increasing Islamophobia, and it's a timeline on the bottom, so you can match that with things, the current political or civil climate, and try to guess what it was that triggered it.
Right. Yeah, that's great. So all of these things that we've talked about already, that is spot on. That's what I want you to do is really, I just want you to explore this week. I don't expect you to have, hard and fast, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for my project, but just get some ideas. If you see one thing and you like it, say, I have no clue what topic this is, but I like this article. And as long as you give me that, I can kind of help you figure out more articles. And as a class, we can collect more, but I need a starting point. Okay. Does anyone else want to share theirs? Or, yeah, Alex.
I am really interested in what I kind of picked up from Doherty's article about culturally inheriting power systems or disempowerment systems, and maybe not really acknowledging that even if you yourself have not had a hand in establishing that power system, you are still benefiting from it or supporting it or ignoring your ancestral contribution to it.
So Tim Doherty's work, right? What would be your keywords?
Maybe cultural inheritance or intersectionality.
In some ways, it almost reminds me of the presentation you did about Cherokee Silver, or I talked about the Cherokee Silverberry, but you talked about the Cherokee Phoenix, right? I could imagine like Malia Powell's work or Ellen Cushman's work being relevant, or Angela Haas. I think there's a lot of, with cultural rhetorics, especially like indigenous rhetorics, there's a lot about perseverance and cultural, it's not inheritance, but kind of like cultural perseverance and how you maintain a culture when, you know, a lot of things are kind of pushing against, you know, against you maintaining that culture. But yeah, I think that's definitely.
Who was the second author? There was Malia Powell, Angela Haas, and
Ellen Cushman.
Ellen Cushman. Okay.
Yep. So these are really great examples. And again, we're going to keep revising these, but that's kind of what you're going to end today's class with, is, again, a start with that. And I'll walk you through some ways to actually, right, I don't expect you to, I've been in this field for a long time. I don't expect you to just say, oh, I think so-and-so writes about this. You're going to have to do some of that research, right? So I have some examples for that. I wanted to kind of backtrack, though, because we didn't get to talk much about Elaine Richardson's work. I do want to say, so I have this up here, and I am putting up a trigger warning because the video, it discusses human trafficking, sexual and physical abuse, addiction, prostitution, and more. So if you want to leave the conversation for about 5 minutes, feel free. No questions asked. But one of the things I have said throughout this class, and I want to continue doing this, is I think it's really easy to read people's books and kind of separate it from the person. And one of the things I love about composition and rhetoric is so many times when we read the text, you get a personal narrative too. We got that with Tim Doherty's work. We got that by hearing from Vincent. We got that from, I can't think, a little bit in Ellen Cushman's work. You'll get that a little bit in Ralph Centrone's work. And it'll keep coming up, like how people as researchers connect to their topics. And one of the things, and I know I said this to Tia in the discussion board, is thinking about the ways that if you want to connect it to your personal life, absolutely, like that is possible, right? Last week, Andrea did a presentation on Cherokee Phoenix and connected it to her life. Alex connected Tim Doherty's work to kind of preserving family histories, right? A lot of you have already done this, and so I definitely think if you're interested in that, go ahead and let me know, because we can find a way to make that happen. But with that said, I want you to get some insight into Elaine Richardson's kind of one of the books that she published here, and kind of how that influenced her as a scholar today. I also have to say Elaine Richardson is someone who I've met her multiple times, and she's just a wonderful, wonderful person who like lights up a room when you see her. The first time I met her, I could have sworn like she just treated me like I was family, came up and gave me a hug, and was really great. So she's one of those people in the field that she's big name, but definitely very much down to earth. So we're gonna watch this for a couple minutes.
Professor of Literacy Studies at The Ohio State University, Dr. Elaine Richardson, will share her memoir with us this morning. She'll discuss her new book, PhD to PhD, How Education Saved My Life. It is quite a story. Good morning, I'm Leon Bibb. This is Kaleidoscope, and so we begin with Elaine Richardson, PhD from Ohio State University. Good to have you with us, Dr. Richardson.
Thank you.
Yeah. What do you teach? What do you teach at Ohio State University?
I'm in literacy studies. Basically, I teach about literacy studies and diversity. So how you teach language and reading and writing from a culturally diverse perspective. And so you have to take the identity and the culture and the history of the people that you're teaching into account.
You've got your PhD.
I do.
We've talked about that a little bit just before we started this broadcast. But you also, the name of your book is PhD to PhD.
Yes.
What's the first PhD mean on the title?
Po-ho on dope to PhD.
Po-ho on dope.
And so that's the vernacular pronunciation of whore. Ho.
Because before you got into this lifestyle that you have now, this wonderful life that you were a prostitute.
Yes, I was turned out at a very young age. I was raped at 13, and that just started me on a downward spiral. I had very low self-esteem, and I just got involved with a string of pimps.
You grew up here in Cleveland.
Cleveland, Ohio, on East 68th and Cedar on the east side. Yes.
But then something happened and you wanted to change your life.
Yes.
How did you, what happened to make you to get off the street as a prostitute, to get off of drugs and to get out of that lifestyle of working with a pimp? What changed?
I had a lot of mentors. I had a lot of people that, especially my mother, I never want to forget that my mother never gave up on me. My mother always ran behind me when I was in junior high school, when I was cutting school, when I got raped, when I got pregnant. My mother always tried to just run behind me. She never threw me away. But eventually, I met a professor at Cleveland State University, Dr. Andrew Edwards, who had a program called Project Second Chance. And it was for young women who had been sexually exploited. And I was getting out of the Justice Center one day and I saw a flyer that talked about this program, Project Second Chance. And so he was one of the people that sold into my life.
And you began to put your life together and getting college education and more college education to eventually...
It was rocky, though. I don't want it to sound like I just went one time and then it was a struggle, you know. It was a struggle.
What you're saying, how education saved my life in your book, PhD to PhD.
Learning about who you are. I didn't know who I was. And so people can tell you anything about yourself when you don't know who you are. So I learned who I was. I learned to respect my family. My mother was a Jamaican immigrant. And when you're a young child, you don't want to be different from your friends. You want to fit in with your peers. And so we spoke funny to them. Kids would say, why does your mama talk funny? Where y'all from? Your mama from Puerto Rico? And that was a point of shame for me because I wasn't like my friends. My parents were older. So I had all these little things that were chinks in my identity and in my armor. And with that and just growing up in a poor, poverty-stricken environment, it took a toll on my identity. And I was very susceptible to be wanting to be liked by the wrong people.
How do you use your story to help shape the lives of young people today, especially at Ohio State University, where you are PhD and teaching literacy? How do you use your life to help others?
I have an after-school program at a middle school because that is a very vulnerable age. I train my PhD students by having them to be literacy mentors at the after-school program, and I work with girls, 11 through 14 years old, because that is the age where girls are looking for their identity. And they're thinking about all types of things, and they're getting all kinds of images from the media about who they are. They're listening to all kinds of music, and they are wanting to be, adults. They're seeking to grow into young women. All of that is a part of your education. And so we use media, we use reality television shows, because this is what the children are watching.
And you use your own music
and
too?
I use my own music. I use
got a CD
stories from my life to tell them about things that I've gone through, and they've heard some of these stories through the music that they listen to, from the videos that they watch, from the television shows that they watch. And so we have them to critically think about, what is this saying about you as a young black girl?
Well, what do you say in your music? How do you the songs that you select?
I talk about going through struggles and coming out of them. One of the main songs on my CD is called Elevated. And so I talk about, I got in trouble, I had to struggle. It took a lot to make it, but now I'm elevated. And that you have to work toward your own self-esteem, that you build your own self-esteem. It's not something somebody can give to you. You get it through accomplishments and achievements that you make.
How many years ago did you decide to change your life and get off the street as a prostitute, get off the drugs?
26 years ago. And I always know it because it's when I had my second daughter. I was pregnant at the time, and I thought that I was pregnant, and I thought that I had killed this baby because I was getting high while I was pregnant. And I called the ambulance on myself, and I wanted them to take me to the hospital to get what I thought was a dead baby out of me. And I went to the hospital, and my baby was not dead. And they didn't wind up putting me in Marysville, which is where I wanted to go because I thought that's what I had to do to get clean.
Now you use all of your background to tell the story,
yes,
to help others stay in school, get in school,
yes,
and find real meaning in life. Where can we find the book, PhD to PhD?
You can go to my website, PhD2PhD.com.
And we can.
All right. So, what are some of the things that are standing out about Richardson in the way that she's talking about her personal connection to her work?
Well, she went back to teach middle school children, just before the age that she ended up in the system herself. She's teaching her students at her university to impact the students that will later remember this and grow. So it's a full circle for her.
Yeah, absolutely. So this moment of her going back to the moment where things changed for her, right? Absolutely. What else?
I really like that I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, so I really like that she pointed out that she wanted to fit in with her peers, and that because her family was from Jamaica, they didn't speak the same. And I'm finding that as a recurring theme in all the articles we're reading, is that the different varieties of language and the different varieties of English.
Yeah.
I just think that maybe that's a trend we need to really push for a greater change.
And I don't know how much of this depends on where you teach, or how much of this is a hard and fast rule about teaching, but how much of this can she address with her students? You know what I mean? Is she allowed to tell a group of freshman students, this is my path? I mean, if she's published it, they can read it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much of that is an institutional, these are the rules of, maintaining some type of distance. Or because that's a struggle. I mean, everyone in here wasn't always an academic. There's going to be something that you might want to say that you can say, I was here, or this happened to me, but I don't know how much of that line.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point about Richardson. I mean, so she actually goes around it's called a one-woman show. I've seen her show once or twice. She came to Syracuse and performed, and she actually has, if you're interested, I don't know if I put it on the slides or not. She does have a TED Talk specifically through Ohio State University. That's really good. It's actually a piece of her performance. But yeah, I mean, so thinking about how much you want to open up to people and how much you're allowed to open up to people, right? I don't know this for a fact, but I could imagine that some of the stuff people read about her is used against her. Whether it's students commenting on, stuff gets used against you online all the time. Or in evaluations and things like that. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier of this project can be as personal as you want, but you don't have to feel like you must be personal with it. But I think a lot of people find kind of energy from telling their personal story. One of the things I love that she says is her kind of background has influenced how she views language from a culturally diverse perspective. And she says she studies language and linguistics to take the identity of people into account. And I think that that's something that she always does in her work is she really talks about the identity of the population she's either working with or studying, or the identity she considers in herself. So I think that's something too to keep in mind, is think about how you're taking people's identity into account, whether you're part of that population or if you're not, right? And that changes how you approach a subject if you consider yourself part of that community or not. Anyone else, anything to say about Richardson or her piece? If not, we're gonna move kind of quickly today, but I'm using next class as also really amalgamation of everything. I'm gonna draw some threads throughout the classes. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and think about some of the articles here. Jennifer is going to talk about this next class, I believe. But you can look at the Padlet that was created. I'll just give you a quick insight. Buying into English here. Really quickly though, what were some, if we can just do kind of keywords, what are some keywords or terms that come up in Prendergast's article? Well, it's the beginning of her book. Yeah, Jacqueline already kind of, yeah, that's all right, you already did this, Jacqueline. So what are those? We have English as currency, the economics of English, capitalism for sure, right? This metaphor of buying.
Russian was the dominant language.
Yeah.
So English is the dominant language. So dominant language.
Yeah, dominant language, absolutely. She talks about, in her book, kind of this idea of linguistic or asymmetry or information asymmetry. And Kanagaraja, we didn't read his book, but his book, it's called The Geopolitics of Academic Writing. He talks about that as well. So for instance, one of the things that he talks about extensively in his book is how we can think that we're being fair in academia and say, well, everyone can submit an article. But if you want it to be transnational and you want to open it up to non-American and non-native English speakers, what happens when a person in Sri Lanka who doesn't have power all the time because they don't have an economic system that gives them power all the time, and their university doesn't have access to the newest journals, how do they participate in the knowledge creation of journals when we're not on the same playing field, right? That doesn't even begin to be equal. Also, if you live in Sri Lanka, for instance, and this is his example, if you live in Sri Lanka and you don't have access to the new journals, and he wrote his book like 10, 15 years ago, if it has to be mailed to you, you're waiting all that time to get it in the mail, or maybe it goes to the wrong place. And then you submit your article via mail, and then you get comments on it because you're using a different variety of English. People saying, well, this isn't standard enough, we don't accept it, right? And there's so many levels of a scholar who's maybe non-American, first language speaking English, in a different time zone, in a third world country. There's so many layers of kind of difficulties that he's talking about. And I think Catherine Prendergast talks about that as well a little bit, of how, when we move beyond a westernized framework, specifically an Americanized framework, things change about how we understand our access to English and how English is used across those cultures, right? I was trying to get Lynette's video, but I think we're going to have to wait till next week. I could see it on my own computer, but I couldn't pull it up on here. So I might wait, but do go ahead and look at, Lynette recorded a video for us about Catherine Flowers' article. What are some keywords about Flowers' article?
The English-only
All right.
policies. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. English-only policies. I'll cheat and I'll show you what Lynette wrote. So we have monolingualism, economic policy, English as a national language, white language ideology, multilingualism, racist language, monolingualism, right? Anyone else want to add other topics to that?
I don't remember if it came up, but the transnationalism, was that in this article?
A little bit.
I know the trans.
Yeah, well, so translingual, Actually, that's a good point to make. Translingualism and transnationalism have a lot to do with each other, right? Translingual is the actual going between languages, and then transnational is, as we talked about in first class, kind of going between spaces. But it can also be, if you're translingual, you're also talking about transnational material. So absolutely. And again, we'll discuss this more in depth next week, because I want you to actually see Lynette's video. But I just want to kind of refresh what these articles are about in our discussion. I do have, I believe, maybe. Yes. All right, we have this one. We're going to watch Kanagaraja, The Place of World Englishes in Composition. Tamara, do you want to say anything about it beforehand, or we're going to watch it, but do you want to say anything to kind of preempt?
Nothing other than I had a heck of a time pronouncing his name. So
No, that's okay.
Ignore that. That was, whew, what a booger. It was a lengthy article, and so I had to sift through because I wanted to keep going and going and going with the keywords, and I just had to like focus down to what I kept seeing, maybe a motif or a theme running through it. That's it.
Yeah, all right. So let's go ahead. We'll watch.
By Suresh Kanarajaha. My apologies if I've mispronounced his name. His article, The Place of World Englishes in Composition. And at first, it was a little difficult to work through. It was really meat heavy at the very beginning, and I found myself having to reread and reread. But the more I reread and began to understand what he was saying, I was actually truly fascinated with what he was saying. And it just brings to mind several questions that I've already had in our class conversations of how can I make English more accessible for my English language learners, and how can I value and appreciate all the other different Englishes that I hear from them. So I have some keywords that I found in his article. There were so many that I had to really narrow it down, otherwise we would have been here forever. The first one that I found was social practices, because he really emphasized that language is very social, and that as people are attempting to speak English, or if they are speaking the English that is spoken in their community or their region or in their home, it's very social, and that language, that English, should be appreciated and valued as a form of communication, and it should be widely accepted. I really liked, well, and it was heartbreaking, the word error. So when he made a comment about students who were afraid to speak up in the classroom because they felt they would be pointed out, or have their errors pointed out to them, and that really resonated with me, because I wouldn't want that if I were trying to learn a foreign language. I don't want my errors pointed out, but I would rather the attempt of my speaking that language appreciated and valued. And then he also went on to say that necessarily their language isn't an error, but it's the way they learn to speak it and the way they speak it at home. So who's to make it right or wrong, and who's to say that it is an error if their pronunciation of wash actually comes out wash, or if they call it a crayfish instead of a crawdad. And those aren't his examples, but those were ones that came to mind when I was reading his article. And then he really talked about the cooperative values. And so when he was talking about the cooperative values of language, especially in the realms of them being social, he was focusing on, let's see if I can find the page. I can't find it. He was focusing, it's page 593 of his article. He was focusing on tolerance and humility as a way of encouraging students to actually speak and attempt, and not just stay in their native language if their native language isn't that of English. But he also had good points at the cooperative values for those who are just learning a different regional dialect. And he used his example of the Sri Lankan English quite a bit. And he said he's always grown up speaking English, but then when he traveled to a different region of the world, he was told that that English was wrong. And it really raised the question of who says it's right or wrong. Which leads us to the next keyword that I really focused in on, and it struck a chord with me, was the power difference. And again, he used his experiences with the Sri Lankan English. And so when he traveled, he noticed that it was white oppressors that were saying, your English is different than mine, and so yours isn't good enough. And so what I got from the text was that someone else's English should never be seen as less than or not good enough if it still is a form of communication. He did talk about the different types of Englishes, and so he was talking about the metropolitan English, which is that accepted, rigid form of either British or Americanized college-level English. He talked about world Englishes, and so his was classified in that grouping of world Englishes, and so the different forms of English that you would find wherever you go across the globe. And he said within that realm of world English, you have the African-American vernacular English, and then Chicano English. And he really fought, in the article, had a strong stance for student right to their own languages. And I had to keep looking back over and over and over again at his right to their own languages. So he used a lot of abbreviations. But it really resonated because, again, who's to say that my students are right or wrong in how they use the English? So a quick little summary. The author speaks out against the expected conformity to the one rigid form of accepted English, whether that be the British English or the Americanized English, categorizing each of these as ME or Metropolitan English. Kanagarata advocates for a wider use of the various Englishes in existence: World English, American Vernacular English, and Chicano English. And he further posits that the mandatory use of ME oppresses those deemed as minorities, even when those peoples are the majority population of the region. Tracing this harmful stigma to colonization, he asserts the notion that those speaking any form of English other than that of their colonizers are seen as nonconformists and ultimately less worthy. I saw several connections to texts that we were reading, and the ones that really stuck out to me and just jumped off the page were most recently Cushman's Elias Boudinot and the Cherokee Phoenix. And I saw a connection because here this Cherokee changed his name to something that was white and Anglo, something that he found admirable in somebody else. And then while he was busy putting the Cherokee language in a typeset, he was also doing the same thing in English, almost as if the Cherokee language wasn't valuable enough to just leave it as it is, but it had to be translated. And then I saw a huge parallel with Dolmage's disabled upon arrival, because again, as he was told his language wasn't good enough, and it was still English, but it was the Sri Lankan English, those who were coming into Ellis Island were given that same message. And Portillo's Assembly Latin Americans, he used the word conformist a couple times, or conform. He used the word assimilate a couple times, and so I saw that in the Portillo article. And then same thing with Masuda's Myth of Linguistic Homogeneity, if I pronounced that one correctly as well. And so it doesn't have to be the same. It's not just one English. I mean, he was really pushing that English appears in different norms and different forms. One thing that he did focus on was the standard written English. And so he brought up the notion that our students, if we're forcing them to speak a certain English, we're also forcing them to write a certain English. And he said that's almost doing just as much harm as forcing that same English. And there was a quote from one instructor who was teaching a 1301 college level class that his long-term goal is the full acceptance of all dialects, and he was trying to achieve that goal by having the students first write in their English and then translate it over into the rigid construct of the standard written English. And our author was saying that while this is good, it's still not good enough because it's still giving the message that their writing is wrong. And then another valuable quote that I saw was in regards to the conformities of those who speak Metropolitan English as their second language, even if their first language is a form of English, are only acting white and they're putting on a show. And he said no one should have to act or perform or put on the show. They should be valued as is. So
Great, thank you. These are, yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't know if it's possible to zoom in on the Pauly Shore, the little image down there. And
I think I can on this one. I don't know if I can on this because I took a screenshot of it.
Right.
I don't think so.
I don't know, when I saw the Pauly Shore, it actually came across my Facebook feed. And then it just it's exactly what we're talking about in this class. And then I thought back to Jennifer's presentation, the second week of class, where she had her daughter speak the way she would with friends and then speak the way, she would in the classroom. And Pauly Shore did the same thing. And so if everyone gets an opportunity to zoom in and look at it, I can understand it. I can translate it. But then when I read it to my husband, he just shook his head and he was like, no, just that hurts. Because it's not what's in the conventional realm of society. And then I thought, but who's to say that it's not accepted?
Does anyone have responses to, first of all, I have to say, you guys are all doing such a great job on these. The infographics are super useful. The picto charts, the videos, the papers, it's all good. There's a lot of great information. And if you're, if you just want to take the work that your classmates have done, if there's something that you're interested in and you can't remember, go back to what they presented and go look at their article, look at their picto chart, and look at their response paper or their video for that week. So if you need more kind of, even today when you're doing the activity in the last part of class, go ahead and use those as your resources because they're really great examples. Do you have something, question?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to let my students write everything that they wanted on their paper.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, how do you, things are scattered all over the floor. How do you then tame it without being categorized as this metropolitan English or standard English? When I want to allow all my students to be able to do that,
Yeah.
but not necessarily that there needs to be a standard. It's just there's some type of, this might be confusing.
Right.
How can we?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's a common question in composition and rhetoric more broadly because a lot of people say, especially with Kana Garage's work, he's a big proponent of shuttling between languages, right? And a lot of people will say, well, how do I teach that if I only know English? How do I let my students shuttle between languages if I only know one, right? And so that's kind of a tension of, well, what do I teach? How do I teach it? And I don't have an answer for that, but does anyone want to respond to that question of how do you not standardize something, but how do you still kind of rein it in? Because
Welcome it, but rein it.
you still have to, you have to accommodate certain things in different classes, right?
It's not
I asked
another
a colleague of
language. Okay.
Sorry. So I asked a colleague of mine that same thing today out of training. She teaches in South Oak Cliff. And so we can only, you can picture the types of Englishes that she hears in her classroom every day. And so it's a task just to get her students to write because most of them are coming in far below grade level. And so we were talking about that in light of this article. And she said that she tells them, she just wants them to get their thoughts on the page in whatever language that is accessible to them. And then she teaches them, this is just the way, standard written English is the way everyone in America is going to respond to, whether that's your language or not. And so she actually did tell them it's like learning a foreign language. And I thought that might have been a unique way of putting it, that she wasn't telling them their language was wrong, but that she was telling them you're going to learn the second language. And she was going to help them master that second language and the writing in that second language. And she said she has complete buy-in from her students, which is something that we push for in composition when our students are afraid to put something on the paper, that she lets them put it down in any way they can at first in their language, whether that be, as our author said, the African American version or the Chicano version, as he called them both. So I thought that was, I don't know, that kind of takes the burden off when you tell them, I'm going to teach you to write in that second language.
Yeah.
Well, that reminds me of the ability to code switch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I guess being able to teach both would be that ability.
How many of you, for your discussion forums in here or for the response papers in here, feel like you are code switching from something else?
Oh, when we write to you?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
What's different about it?
It's a formal way of expressing thought, I guess.
Right. Okay. What else?
I don't even think about it anymore. I know it
You
is.
don't think?
Yeah,
But when I'm writing, it's different, and I
Right.
know it, and I read it back, and it's my voice. I can
Yeah.
recognize my own, and I've been doing it for so long. But
Excuse me. Excuse me.
I don't think about it. I know I do it afterwards when I go back through it. It might not be the way I would say it out loud, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't think about it anymore while I do it.
Yeah. Does anyone else feel like they code switch? In what way? Andrew, reluctant hands.
I think when you're writing for a class, in a discussion post, you want to appear to be as intelligent as possible. You don't want to just use any kind of random wording or typical jargon that you would use on a daily basis when talking to a friend, something like that. You want to convey yourself in the most intellectual means as possible, and I think in these discussions you're kind of code switching in that respect, to where you're trying to make yourself sound respectable and that people take you seriously when you're using that language.
Absolutely. So I think there's various ways to code switch, right? There's in the types of the vocabulary used, there's the types of jargon, right? There's actual different words. There could be different dialects that you're changing in and out of. I know when I speak to my parents, I speak differently than when I'm at school, when I'm talking to my boss. So there's multiple examples. There's also, literally between languages, right? If I were speaking to my grandpa, I might kind of throw in some Polish with him, or, Polish and English phrases that I wouldn't with anyone else, because they would look at me and have no clue what I was saying.
This is a little like what Tamara was saying, but for the second paper, I always have students, once it opens up and they can do something other than an essay, the first thing that always comes up is poetry. And I don't just have them write a poem, I have them try to do a movement as a speaker in different situations. And I give them I say, if you want to mimic a formal, write a sonnet, because there's rules that you have to stick to, and then write something more like song lyrics, will be slang and all that, and then move and try to pretend you're from a different group, or how would you act in church, what would it look like? And write it from the same speaker in 3 different situations. One where he's trying to act differently, one where they're more comfortable, and maybe one where communication is totally different. As a way to take the formal stuff and literally make it foreign. Like, no one writes like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Yeah, Alex.
I have an example that kind of actually builds on all of this. Excuse me. Today in the Writing Center, I had a student bring me a lot of his poetry that he'd been working on to look at. And he was using African American vernacular English. And at one point he said R, A-R-E. And I was like, oh, you mean O-U-R? And he was like, no, I don't want to focus on the words. I want to focus on what the reader is getting out of it, basically. So I think bearing this in mind, sometimes code switching is on the person who's like the reader or the observer, and the content producer gets to make their own choice about how to present it.
Yeah, that's a great example because there's a lot of with code switching, and I think this goes back to your question earlier, like how do you encourage it but bring it in? I don't have an answer necessarily, but I think one of the things that all the people we've read who are talking about code switching or translingualism or kind of shuttling between languages, their goal is to use language as an empowering tool, right? That they know that people use language not as to disempower people, but their goal as teachers, Kanagarajas and Prendergast, it's this idea of getting students and getting people to learn how to use language in their benefit or to their benefit. And so I think what Alex is saying, like, there is, what I try to do in my classroom is get students to understand that they have power to make choices about their language in my classroom. They might not have it in the outside world, and I can't change that, but they do have choice. They have an ability to make choices in my class. And so that's something that I really encourage. But that idea of being able to make choices, you also want to teach them, not you guys, but in my mind, I also want to teach them, like, what are the choices that will benefit them to use standard English? Like, when is that a benefit to them? They might not want to use it, but when is that rhetorical moment necessary, or when is it, like, going to get them a job? Or, yeah, when is it advantageous? Absolutely. But the idea of looking at it as a choice rather than you have to do this, I think is helpful. It doesn't change the dynamic of, like, we still have to teach certain things, but I like talking about it as a choice in the classroom, right? And that's a different type of community than when you're in the outside world. And so I actually do give students a choice to, like, use different vernaculars, use different dialects. Cool. All right, so I want to kind of wrap up quickly and give you a quick update. I've heard a lot of, it's that time of the semester where everyone's getting a little overwhelmed, and I've heard of this from multiple people. So I've looked at the syllabus, and I'm making a couple changes that I hope will benefit you all. If you have any issues with them, go ahead and let me know. That's fine. But first update is, originally we had response papers due much sooner. Response papers are not due until the 16th of October for group 1 and 2, and then 23rd of October for group 3 and 4. If by chance you've already started your response paper because you're way ahead of the game, let me know and I'll accept it ahead of time. Okay? Don't redo anything, but for most people, probably have not started it. Have any of you started them? Okay, we should be pretty good. The other thing, and I don't know if I have access to it here or not, you might have to, oh, okay. So on our syllabus, the other thing that I've put on the syllabus is that, as I said at the beginning of class, I want today to really be a chance for you to take some time. If you have this time carved out for yourself, then you can use it. And if not, just during the week, kind of generate some ideas. But I wanted to actually give you class time to do some work if you want it. All right? But for that, we're going to actually pick back up next week and really kind of bring these texts together. So we are going to talk more about these texts next week. With that, I don't want to add a whole bunch of reading. So what I'm changing for next week is Synchron. You only have to read one chapter. And I'm going to let you pick which chapter you want. Go ahead and look at what the chapters are, but you only have to read one, okay? And I'll give enough of a summary that whatever chapter you've read, we can still have a discussion about it. But the goal with Synchron, the reason we're reading it is really partly about the topic, but also his writing style and how he uses data. He's doing that ethnography, and so that involves kind of going to a site and interviewing people and talking with them. And I think that that's what I want you to get out of it. It's more or less the feel for his book, and not so much let's get a whole lot of topical information out of it. It's more or less, Synchron's a really wonderful writer, so think about it in that way. Like, what do you learn about how he writes? Okay, so go ahead and pick one chapter and read it. That's the only extra reading you have for next week. So if you haven't read the articles this week, catch up on them. We'll kind of, my goal for next week is I'm going to draw out some threads that I've been seeing in the discussion posts and in your article responses, and kind of pull together where we're at in the semester, okay? So only one chapter for next week. That's your only other reading. The other thing you're going to do is, and like I said, we're leaving class in about 2 minutes for you to have a chance to do this if you're home and you don't have kids in your house till 10 p.m. Or you can do this during the week. But it's a brainstorming activity for your final project. And I'll talk you through it pretty quickly, but you've already done some of it. So the first thing you're going to do is remind yourself of the requirements for the final. So I want you to actually look at your final or your syllabus and look at the final project. Are you going to do a symposium or are you doing an exploration paper? Go ahead and read those again. What are the requirements? Step 2, brainstorm about what topics in class interest you. Write down keywords, topics, or readings that we've done that you have found interesting. Try to identify at least 5 keywords. We've already started that, but now that you know what we're talking about, go ahead and revisit that, okay? I gave an example about J. Dolmage. The next one is start researching. So I want you to develop a bibliography. It doesn't have to be in perfect MLA form. Just give me a name and a date, whatever you think. So develop a bibliography of which articles, websites, books, etc. This is the key thing. It has to be rhetoric and composition that you might want to read or might need to read. And I've given you some suggestions to start researching. So the first one is really just using Google. This is only a beginning. Do not use all your research this way. But if you want an idea, go to Google, see what names are coming up when you type in specifically composition and rhetoric and immigration, composition and rhetoric and citizenship, composition and rhetoric and lingua franca, okay? See which names are coming up or which publishing avenues. Is it University of Pittsburgh Press? Maybe you go to Pittsburgh's website and look at it. Maybe it's certain journals. Look at the bibliographies of the articles we've read in this class, all right? Or go to popular composition and rhetoric journals and explore your keywords, their archives, and search around. So I've given you a lot of links. If I don't have them linked, it's because they're through the library database. So you have to go to Texas A&M University libraries, and you would type in the journal, like find a journal, you would type in college composition and communication, and then you would find access to that one, to college English, Rhetoric Society Quarterly, and all of these. You can look at podcasts, rhetoricity. And then the last one I would do is just use the library database search. With that, I might start with the database in general, but then maybe go to more like language ones, so JSTOR. What are some other good databases? I don't even do database searches anymore. MLA might be good.
Project Muse.
Yeah, Project Muse. But really, I think you'll probably get more just going to look at these journals. So, for instance, Reflections. If you go to the website, you can go to the archive and just explore what articles have been out recently based on, oh hey, that's my article. Just kind of look at the keywords: research as care, shared ownership approach, rhetorical research in trauma communities, reaching backyards and boardrooms, strategies for circulation to change the conversation. Right, and so just go ahead and take a look. All of these, you can click on them and they're free, open access. So just wander around these websites, okay? Use them as databases themselves. So for instance, let's try this with the Journal of Multimodal Rhetorics. Actually, this is a new journal, so probably won't have a search function. Let's try Literacy and Composition Studies. For instance, say I want to look at citizenship. Just go to the search. And look at that. We got tons and tons of articles about citizenship. All right. Someone else give me a keyword. Someone we haven't heard from. Do you have any keywords?
Intersectionality.
2. All right, but we got a couple. One more keyword.
Assimilation.
Yep, handful. All right. So use each of the, you don't have to go through all of them, but use a couple of these journals as your databases. All right. Some of them will be more user friendly than others. Some of them you might actually just have to do the physical work of searching as opposed to typing in keywords, but they're really user friendly, I think. If you have questions, let me know. But the main thing I want from you, I'm not going to grade this. We're actually going to use it in class next time to discuss each other's work. So I would like you to submit it, but it can be in any form. I don't care if there's errors in it. I do not care what it looks like. Just give me something, okay? So develop a short in-process proposal, no more than one page, okay? With the following: some kind of description of what you're interested in, some keywords, some sources you might be interested in, or even author names, like, hey, Kate Vieira sounds like she does this work that I want to, put that, and then pose any questions to me or the class that you might have, okay? Again, do not spend a lot of time on this. Do not worry about how complete this is. It's very much a pre-proposal, all right? Just get some ideas on the page. That's all I have for today. I'm going to give you time, so I told myself I would limit the time, so that way you have, if you're clocked in till 10, you have an hour and 7 minutes to do this. But you just have to turn it in before class on Wednesday, okay? There should already be a discussion board posted for it, but let me know if it doesn't show up. Okay? Does anyone have questions or comments, issues? Does this feel doable? Yes. Cool. We lost everyone else.
They're still on. They're just free, but
Oh, okay.
We're here.
their video.
Oh, okay.
We're here.
You're there. All right. Cool. All right, well then have a good week. I will be getting more responses to you all this week. Email me with questions about this, and or if you want help on where to start searching, let me know. Okay. All right.
Huzzah.
Thank you.
Huzzah.